Welcome to The Real Heal, a show featuring real, raw, and authentic conversations between experts in the holistic health space. I am your host, Dr. Renee Wallenstein, also known as the Libidoologist, double board certified doc, entrepreneur, as well as healthcare disruptor. So if you're ready, let's get into it. I am so excited to have you on the show today, Alysia. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and flip the script and be on the other side of the mic now.
I know. For those that don't know, I was on Alicia's podcast, the Purely podcast. Gosh, how long ago now? I don't even know, but
I don't
seems
know.
like forever ago that
Yeah.
we chatted and it aired, but probably wasn't that long ago. But
Yeah.
and we hit it off. So I'm like, why don't you hop on my show and let's just spread some of your knowledge to my audience. And, again, we're going to dive into some topics today that I don't typically talk about myself. And I think, I'm always the one to go to the expert, the one who talks about it all the time. And that is you, especially when it comes to mindset, Pilates, making yourself a priority. We're going to touch on all of that.
Yay.
But before we do, the audience sort of knows a little bit about you from your bio, but tell us about yourself and how you got doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, of course. So I am Alysia Pope Arrett. We were just talking about that, my new married name. And I am a health coach and Pilates instructor. And my whole mission is to teach women how to prioritize themselves again. For so long, I was a recovering people pleaser and worrying so much about what other people thought of me and really just making other people happy. And that was kind of like the premise. It's like the theme that really just goes throughout every single piece of my wellness journey and really being able to shift that. So for so long, I was so worried about other people liking me or looking a certain way so people would like me and things like that. Because I think I grew up in the 90s and that was the world of, low fat and Weight Watchers and tiny models on the cover of everything. And I think that really early on, like probably in elementary school, I started to connect. Okay, people treat you differently with how you look. And I realized that from a really early age. And I think then that's where that people pleaser sort of piece came out and just continued all the way through post college too, of, okay, how can I be the fun one? How can I make other people like me? How can I, look a certain way so people like me, that sort of thing. And I attached being skinny or with how you looked to people liking you and people accepting you and how people treated you. Because to be honest, my middle school was like rough, it's like my middle school was really like, it was a lot of cattiness. It was a lot of mean girls, same thing with high school too. And so even moving into college, I still kind of had that narrative. So my whole goal in becoming a health coach, becoming a Pilates instructor is teaching women the lessons that I needed so much and so badly throughout my entire life. And that is that, number one, that you are your top priority and taking care of yourself is the least selfish thing that you can do. And when it comes to disappointing somebody else or disappointing yourself, you need to choose to disappoint that external person because you need to give yourself your own validation. You can't get that external validation. Number one, it's a lot of pressure to put on somebody else. And number two, then it can be taken away from you at any given moment, right? So say you're looking at somebody else to give you your confidence or to make you feel loved or to make you feel worthy. Well, what happens if that person goes away? Then what? So really giving ourselves everything that we need and focusing on those like different mindset shifts. So that's a lot about me and my story and why I'm doing what I'm doing today. I live in Los Angeles. I'm originally from Chicago. But yeah, I'm sure we can dive into so many of those different things as well. But that's a little bit about my story and why I'm doing what I'm doing today.
I love it. And I feel like I know you're a health coach as well, but I feel like a lot of the things that we learn about self-acceptance and mindset, like it's on the job learning. It's like when we work on ourselves, right? We do the studying, we work on ourselves, we put the practices into place, and then we just turn around and teach others to do the same exact thing because it's working so well, right? So I work with a community of women who are really hard on themselves, just like you were, just like I was growing up. My story sounds a lot like yours, but I just grew up in the 70s.
Yeah.
The same thing. And, them as well as us or me, I can speak for myself. I had a ton of guilt and shame around just like daily decisions, especially, regarding my health. So like if I didn't a couple of things, like if I didn't eat a certain way, or if I ate something
Mhm.
quote unquote bad, right? And then also myself, like a lot of the women in my community, I put my self-care, my happiness, my needs at the bottom of my priority list, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is what you preach. So how do you teach women the concept of, self like acceptance, self-acceptance, getting out of that vicious cycle, that shame, guilt, especially if you don't follow the the goal of eating so many grams of protein or no carbs or whatever the recent, the most common or trending paradigm is.
Yeah.
And how do you make them also not feel guilty about prioritizing their own self-care? Because I think a lot of women, they're like, yeah, yeah, I get it. I get it. I should take care of myself. But I have I have myself twins, 15-year-old twins. I just moved to a
Mhm.
different city. Like, how do I do that?
Yeah. I think number one, remembering that taking care of yourself is actually the least selfish thing that you can do. I think it's like it's that old saying of like, what they tell us on the airplane every single time: put your mask on before you put somebody else's on, because if you don't put your own mask on first, how are you able to show up there? So I think, especially for women, that was like my number one thing of realizing that it was like, okay, if I just keep pleasing all these other people and I'm just consistently taking from my cup and taking from my cup and taking from my cup, you get to a point where you don't have anything left to give and you are not your best self. So I always ask myself, how can I show up as my best self? And sometimes, especially if you're in a place where you're caring more about other people than yourself, then think about it that way. Think about it like, okay, how can I show up to be the best mother, to be the best partner, to be the best friend that I can be, daughter, whatever it is, to be that best version of yourself at work, whatever. It's going to be taking that time for yourself and really prioritizing how you're able to show up as that best version of you. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. And it's like, it's so simple, but it's also something that I think we forget so often because we just think we have to, take care of this person or take care of this kid or whatever first. And I know that sometimes it's a lot easier said than done too, right? Because I think that number one, a lot of people, maybe you mentioned something about self-acceptance too, that a lot of people might think, okay, I'm not worthy of that. Like, I don't deserve this time. I haven't done enough or whatever, because we're so hard on ourselves. But again, realizing that like, you don't need to earn taking care of, like we need to be taken care of. Like, it's kind of like, I was actually just on the phone with a client and I use this example with food as well. I'm like, we don't need to earn food. Like, we don't say that our car needs to earn its gasoline, right? Or like, if you have an electric car, it doesn't need to earn its charging. It needs it to operate, right? So like, same thing, how we're thinking about food, like we need it to operate. We also need this self-care. We need this time to recharge our battery, whatever that means for you, to show up as the best version of you, to operate efficiently and effectively too.
I so love that. And I think I just one little key thing you just said, whatever that means to you. And I
Mm-hmm.
think so many women like see, oh, I don't have 3 hours to go and meditate for an hour, go sit in the sauna for a half hour, and then go exercise for a half hour. And I don't have that time. And that's not what we're talking about at
Mm-hmm.
all. How much time, do you even put a time on it? Is it all
No.
individual as well?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And I think that's actually a really good point that you bring up, is that I always say that it's so much more about the consistency for me. And like, that's what I'm always speaking to about my clients as well. But I found that consistency of carving out some piece of your day for you, but being really flexible with it. Because the thing is that like, life isn't consistent, right? Like, you were just telling me like before we started, you're like, I'm in a new place, like I'm in a new city, I'm in these new, like, there's so many things that are going on all the time around us. It's not realistic to say, okay, it's going to be the exact same routine every single day that I'm taking care of myself. And I think that sometimes on social media, it can feel that way. Like, it needs to be like that. Like, it needs to be this whole elaborate morning routine or something like that. It doesn't need to be that. And it's going to be different. It's going to be bio-individual to whatever that is for you. And even if it's simply 5 minutes that you're doing something that's really going to recharge you. Like, I think it was maybe somebody that I interviewed, or maybe I heard on a podcast, podcast, but she had said like she was a new mom and she's like, honestly, sometimes my self-care is like going in my closet and taking a few deep breaths for 3 minutes and just having that quiet time to myself. So really just seeing, okay, how can I fit this in some way each day? But I think that consistency of showing up for you each day is consistently proving to yourself that you are worth showing up for, no matter how much time. Maybe some days you have an hour, right? And you can do all the things that you want to do that make you feel really good. You can go on a walk or whatever, but maybe sometimes it's going to be like, okay, I have a minute here to squeeze this in. I have 2 minutes here to squeeze this in, and really being prioritizing with those like tiny little moments throughout the day, even no matter how small they are. It's those tiny habits each day that are going to add up to make really, really big incremental change. It's not these like giant overhauls that we're doing. It's the tiny things that we're doing each day that are going to add up and build up like building blocks to really make you that like best version of you and show up for yourself each day.
I love that. I love everything about that, and it's interesting because you also see all over online, like having a routine and a morning routine. And I do love that. And I tried for a while to have it like the same, and I did for a long time. But then there were so many moving parts, like you said, life, right? Like never did one day didn't look like the other, or like maybe one week looked the same, but the following week was different. And what I found I was doing is I was starting to beat myself up because I couldn't have that same exact routine. And I did exactly what you said. I just shifted. Maybe it didn't look exactly the same. It's what felt good that day. Like, okay, today it feels good for me to take a half hour walk with my dog outside, which is generally every day now.
Yeah.
But like, and I fit that in somewhere probably usually twice a day because it makes me feel so good. But like, whatever that is. And another comment I want to make that just sort of hit me as you were talking is, we also talk about balance. And I think we sometimes have this skewed, I talk to a lot of women, I have no balance in my life, or like, and my feelings are like, maybe I take it from my life, is that there are some weeks, months that it's more about my children and or my husband. And then some that's a lot more about me, but I always get a little bit of me in there, So like sometimes it's a lot of me, sometimes it's just a little me, but there's always me. And that way I don't feel completely deprived. And I say deprived, quote unquote deprived, but like at least I'm still remembering to take care of myself and what I need, whatever that looks like at that time in my life.
Yeah.
And, I traveled a lot over the summer. It was all about my daughter. But then we went on a vacation. It was back about me and, what mom wanted to do on vacation. And so like, I feel like sometimes you just got to ride those ebbs and flows of life.
Totally.
And not forget about ourselves, but know like, okay, this is where I am right now. And I see I'm coming to a little more me time coming up, and then, okay, a little more about them and a little bit more about me, because I think moms start feeling super guilty about not having any time for themselves, or they perceive it. Whereas, and I think it's also about awareness, right? Like just becoming aware, like, okay, I have 2 hours today, but I have 10 minutes or 5 minutes in the closet, taking some deep breaths, just being aware, like I did have some time for me today, and just stopping and being aware of that time that you took for yourself. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And I think that whole idea about balance, I love that you bring that up, because I think that especially, again, I think social media is really great, but I also think sometimes it can be really misleading in a lot of ways. And it can make it seem like, oh yeah, I'm balancing everything all the time of all these different things. But I think that also, I think there's like phases of our lives too. And I don't think you can balance everything all at the same time. But I think like you mentioned, like having that consistency of, okay, there's going to be some times where you're going to have a lot more time for you during this phase of your life. There's going to be some times where maybe it's a little bit less, but I think the important piece is taking that time to slow down and like tune in with yourself and be aware of it, right? Being aware that like, okay, I'm going into a season where I know I'm not going to have like as much time for me, but also I know that this season is kind of over around this time. And then that's where I'm going to really try to prioritize like filling up my cup again, of like, how can I get back to that place that I am being able to take care of myself each day? Like I'm about to go into a season where I'm going to be traveling for 5 weeks straight. And so I know I'm like, I'm going to have to be super, super flexible with my routine. I'm going to have to, like maybe not have as much time for myself. So how can I kind of incorporate the things that are making me feel good, but being really flexible. I think that like the flexibility around the things that make you feel good, I think is really, really important. I mean, literally, I have like my morning books right here. It's 10:30 in the morning. I used to do them as soon as I woke up. Lately, it's like I've been in a stage where I've been needing a lot more sleep. So I've been waking up a lot later than normal. And so I haven't been able to get them, but they're here on my desk. And when I have a second today, I'm going to take the 5 minutes to do them because I know that they make me feel really good. I'm not beating myself up that I didn't do it as soon as I woke up. I'm being gracious with myself. I think, especially as women, we need to give ourselves more grace because I think our world is built around like the men's hormone cycle, right? And like the men's circadian rhythm of like their 24 hours, exact same cycle every single day. We are not that, like we go through different phases of our lives, and each month we go through different phases of our cycle where, we're going to have certain weeks, we're going to have a lot more energy, certain weeks we're not. And so I think that consistently tuning in and giving yourself the grace that like, we are not stagnant beings, especially as women, like we are not, we're going to show up differently each day. So I think that being able to tune into that and have that grace. And I think that this is just like a tangent, but tuning into my cycle and starting to track my cycle was also one of the things that allowed me to really accept and be kinder with my body and kinder with how I was treating my body, because it allowed me to understand like, oh, okay, like it makes sense why I couldn't wake up to do this workout today because I'm on my period right now. Right. And I actually need more sleep. And actually it's not great for my cortisol to get up and do like a HIIT workout right now. And so, yes, it makes sense why I needed more sleep, so I think that just kind of putting that behind it gave me that validity as well. So that's a whole other tangent, but that was like very helpful for me as well. And just kind of understanding that we need to give ourselves that grace because we're not the same every single day.
Yeah. It's interesting. I functioned at that masculine energy for many years of my life, going through medical school, residency, practicing medicine. And it's like, you're kind of conditioned even as a woman, if you don't function at that level 24/7, like men,
100%.
you're not going to make it. And so I did it until I burned out. And then I started like hearing about this thing called like feminine energy. Like, and again, I think we can have the best of both worlds, right? And like
Yeah.
ride the wave of the more masculine energy when it's when their cycle. And so I think once I had the aha moment and I was like, I started giving myself grace when I didn't necessarily, like you said, feel like doing that hard workout or, whatever the case may be. Or eating something that I don't normally eat because I had a craving, or sleeping a little bit later, going to bed a little earlier, whatever the case may be. I started giving myself grace of like, oh yeah, this is why, and I have a 28-day cycle, not a 24-hour cycle. So
Yeah.
I think that's really super important to bring up. So let's shift a little bit and talk about intuition, because I mentioned to you before we hit record, like I used to have this preconceived notion that, I studied macros and followed macros, and I was a fitness competitor and I used to exercise like crazy. And so like, then after that, I was like, okay, I can eat intuitively now because I know how to eat properly. Right. I know
Totally.
I can tell you, like I can used to be able to look at a piece of food and, a piece of food, a piece of
Yeah.
chicken or a potato and tell you exactly how many carbs, protein, and fat are in each. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And which is a little dysfunctional. We're not going to go there right now, but like, and I saw food as more of a, not something that nourished my body, is more of like a end to a means to an end,
Yeah.
like, so, but that's a whole nother topic. My point is, I thought that you had to have the experience of knowing how to quote, unquote, eat properly. Not that I was, but, and how to exercise properly in order to then do it intuitively. Because I thought,
Mhm.
well, how can you do it intuitively if you've never learned the correct way to do it? And so, I mean, my question is, and I do not believe that at all anymore. I totally don't believe that. But
Yeah.
how do you teach your clients to eat, move, and live more intuitively?
Yeah. So I think you bring up a really interesting point because I do think that the education component of food is something that still does need to be talked about more. And I actually do have a whole session with my clients on the education component of food and nutrition and how food works in our body, because I think that to me, education is empowering. And I actually do kind of agree that you do need some of the education behind it to, especially when you're coming, because a lot of my clients have similar background to me, right? They've gone on countless diets. They've been yo-yo dieting for their entire lives, and they just don't even know like which way is up, right? And that's exactly where I was. It's like, I have no idea. Like, I was in a place where I'm like, carbs are bad, fats are bad, fruits bad, all these different things. And then I got to this point with myself where I was like, wait, why am I cutting out these whole foods that I used to love and enjoy? And I started to slowly add them back in, and I started to feel really, really good. And so my whole thing around food, around eating intuitively with the education behind it, is having an abundance mindset when it comes to food. So often, and the reason being was that really helped me. Again, it's like every single thing that I teach to my clients, it's a tool that helped me get there because I've personally been through it myself. And it was focusing on, instead of focusing on, okay, what do I need to eliminate from my plate, or what can I not have on my plate? Because for so long, I was always looking at like, I can't have this, or I can't have that, or, I need to take away this, or that's off limits, that food is bad, whatever. Then I really started to shift to like, what do I need to add to my plate to not only feel good physically, but also feel good emotionally? And I think those are the two pieces in terms of like the intuitive eating that I think need to be like fused together. So I do think that having the education behind nutrition, behind building your plate, is really important. And it's actually one of the first things that I teach my clients, and they feel so empowered after learning about it because they start to notice how they feel differently. And more times than not, I'm telling my clients to add things to their plate, right? It's not that we're overeating or whatever. It's that we're all so stuck in this lack mindset and this lack mentality that we just try to eat as little as possible because we're trying to be smaller. So I think another piece of that is like really looking at the intention behind what we're eating, right? So like not eating to be smaller, but eating to nourish our body because, our body we're fueling our body. We're eating to feel really good, and we don't need to earn that, right? We just talked about the car example before that. So really focusing on like, okay, let's make sure we're having carbohydrates, make sure we're having fat, make sure we're having protein. And from there, it's like, I do give my clients, I'm saying, okay, yeah, like anywhere from this to this in terms of quantities. However, the piece that I say to that, and then I say, okay, and then anything else that you want to add that's going to make you feel good, both physically and emotionally. And also knowing like every plate isn't going to be perfect. There is no perfect when it comes to our food. But then from there, just continuing to ask yourself the question, what's going to make me feel good, both physically and emotionally? And a lot of times it's looking at the plate and seeing like, okay, how did I feel after this meal, right? How was I feeling before and how was I feeling after? And the whole piece of that, like being intuitive, in terms of this can be with food or it can be with anything in life, but I think a lot of it is slowing down. We're so on autopilot nonstop that we don't take the time to say, okay, I had breakfast at 8 a.m. and I'm actually hungry at 10, or I'm hungry at 9:30. Okay. So I tell my clients, I'm like, okay, that's amazing that you just noticed that, but how can we add in so we can get maybe like 3 to 4 hours? Like what were we missing on that plate where we could add something in? And I think it's a really empowering thing to think and know, okay, how can I balance my blood sugar? How can I, eat optimally, but also have my cake and eat it too when it comes to that food? And I don't tell my clients either. This is another piece of like the intuitive piece and also the bioindividuality piece. I don't tell them, okay, it needs to be these types of carbs, or it needs to be this type of protein, or it needs to be this type of fat. I think that part of it is understanding what works for you, right? Of like, okay, what type of protein feels best in your body? Maybe it's plant-based, maybe it's pescatarian, maybe it's meat, whatever that is, start to feel what works best for you, but also just that consistent question of asking yourself what's going to feel good, both physically and emotionally. And I think that's a really important thing, and coming at it from that abundance mindset. So like to answer your question, I think the education is empowering, and I actually think it helps people eat intuitively even more to really feel good in their mind and body. And that's not to say that every single plate needs to have all of those things, but I think that, again, I think having the education behind it is really important, so.
Totally agree. Yeah. So it's sort of, a take on my former thoughts, but like, I totally agree that you have to you have to know what works for you and what's especially those that come to us, right? They do want to get healthier.
Yeah.
They do want to feel better. They do want to have better energy. And for me, they want a better libido. But, they need the education as far as like, hey, what foods are going to help you get there? And then with that, they can pick and choose for their own body of, like you said, the biofeedback, the hunger, the energy, the sleep, like how's their mood? Like how is this working for you? And if not, what can we add? Like you
Yeah.
said, because obviously that wasn't enough food, that what can we add as opposed to take away to get you, to sort of, get rid of the cravings or the hunger in an hour or what have you. So
Yeah.
I love that. I totally love that answer.
Yeah.
So thank you. So,
Yeah.
and I know if I were to mention on this podcast, weightlifting or HIIT, most of my audience would definitely know what I'm talking about. Like a lot of people know what high intensity interval training is or weightlifting, but you come from a different side of the exercise world or the fitness world. And you teach Pilates, you're a Pilates expert. So a lot of my audience they don't even know what Pilates is. They might be like, oh, it's one of those fluffy, fitness routines, just like yoga, right? Like this, if I'm not sweating and again, you sweat during Pilates, believe me, but like, I think we have this like preconceived notion, unless we're jumping up and down and like doing really these harsh movements on our joints and our body, that we're not getting a good workout. We're not burning the calories. We're not going to lose the weight. And I totally disagree with that. But why don't you educate us a little bit on Pilates? Like, what is it? So maybe you'll open up the eyes of my audience and maybe they'll try it.
Yeah, totally. So a little bit about, I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because my relationship with exercise used to be exactly that. It used to be, oh, you should be going to the gym for a minimum an hour for it to be quote unquote worth it. Or your exercise has to be like really tough on your body to be, to be doing anything, to be effective. Or, I need to be super depleted after my workout and feel like I can't do anything for it to be effective or for it to be doing anything. Right. I used to be in that place, and I used to think that they need to be so tough on the body for that to happen. But I found myself going to like these HIIT workouts, for example, and I had such anxiety before going. I hated running. I despised running. I have absolutely nothing against running, but like me as a person, I did not like it. Like, so that's like my number one PSA. Do not go to a workout or do not do an exercise that you dread or that you don't want to do. Like if you're finding yourself going to something and you're dreading it and you're not looking forward to it, then like, it's probably not the right movement for you. So I think that's number one, is that, so if you've tried Pilates and it gives you that feeling, like don't do Pilates, right? Like that's what I will say, is that I think the most effective workout is one that you enjoy and are going to show up to. However, it's so interesting because Pilates, as soon as I started implementing it again, I noticed all of these different things happening in my body. So number one, I was really looking forward to it as when I was going. Number two, I was noticing I didn't feel depleted after the movement. I was feeling energized, super energized throughout the day. I noticed crazy changes in my body, because that's also another thing, is that Pilates is really, it's a core focus workout. So your core is your powerhouse. It's the thing that's at the root of every single movement that you're doing in Pilates. And the stronger that one's core is, the more supported the rest of our body will be, the less prone to injuries you'll be, the less straight on your neck, your shoulders, etc. So Pilates is a really smart movement. And also it's really great for your hormones as well. So that's a whole other like piece of it, because it's really focused on the breath. Every single movement that you're doing, you're focusing on inhaling through your nose, exhaling out of your mouth. Number one, that's not only good for our nervous system, it's really great for just breathing in general. So often we're not breathing properly anymore. We're not breathing deeply. So that's like a huge piece of Pilates too. And so if somebody isn't familiar with Pilates, there's two different forms. So one, there is a reformer that you can go to. You can go to a studio, and a Pilates reformer, sometimes they look a little bit scary, but if you go to a good studio, then like the instructor will be able to explain it to you. It was determined and it was founded by Joseph Pilates, who is this guy. It was actually originally called Contrology because it's all about like, that's what he had named it. And then it took on the name of Pilates later on, which was his last name. But basically it's all about proper alignment. So that's Pilates is an exercise for longevity. And I promise you, if you're thinking like, oh, it doesn't do anything, or it's not hard enough, or it's not effective enough, try it once and you will completely be floored by, you know, how you feel or how sore your body feels. I mean, when I brought my husband to Pilates for the first time, I was like, it was comical. It was hilarious. And he's somebody who lifts super heavy weights, and it's really good for you as well, because you get the resistance, especially if you're using a reformer, for example, you're getting the resistance from the springs and from that on there. So, but without the super heaviness on your joints, right? So that longevity that I mentioned as well, it's really easy on your joints. And like I was saying, it encourages the proper posture and alignment in your body. So you'll have less back pain. You'll be able to stand up straighter. So a lot of times people will say, oh, Pilates makes you taller or like longer, or leaner, or whatever. The results that come from that is because one, it does encourage the proper alignment, but every single move in Pilates is, like I mentioned, it's based off the core, but you're also doing things like you're doing like spine stretches, right? So you're realigning your spine, and you're doing things like a spinal massage where you're like twisting a lot, right? And you're also flushing a lot of toxins out of the body too, which is going to decrease bloating, decrease inflammation. A lot of the moves in Pilates actually stimulate your lymphatic system. So if you think about like the hundreds, for example, and for anybody that doesn't know the hundreds or hasn't heard of Pilates before, it's basically like you're in a boat pose on the mat, and your arms are by your side, your legs are out, heels together, toes apart, and then you begin pumping your arms. So if you think about that, like a big part of your lymph is actually right underneath your armpit, and you're pumping that, right? So it's like you don't even realize how many of the moves are focusing on that, on focusing on flushing out the toxins. So Joseph Pilates was really, really smart when he was designing these movements, because they're all to encourage how the body is meant to be and really how to support the body in the best way possible. And you can also do mat Pilates as well, which is what I teach on my on-demand platform. But overall, I'm obsessed with Pilates so much. I could probably go on and on. I think the mind-body connection is huge as well. Your mind is on every single movement that you're doing. So I think the mindfulness piece of things is really great for decreasing stress. And it's also really great for brain health as well, with the breath and really focusing on the mindset and all of that. So there's a lot of benefits to Pilates, and a lot of people do associate it with yoga. It's completely different. It's a completely different form of modality. So the biggest difference between yoga and Pilates is that Pilates is more controlled. And when I say that, it's when you think about yoga, it's all about opening up, right? It's all about like stretching and things like that. And yes, Pilates has a lot of stretching in it. However, Pilates is more about being aligned in your body, right? So like we're keeping everything in this like form. We're not kind of like stretching out like crazy or opening up our hips. It's really about like keeping the hips stacked and things like that. So a lot of things that are like really great in terms of like if you think about like chiropractic principles in a sense. So that's kind of like the biggest difference between yoga and Pilates, and just like how you're kind of stretching as well. It's a lot more controlled, where it's like, okay, we're keeping the pelvic bone aligned, we're keeping it tucked, we're keeping our abs engaged and things like that. Like a lot of Pilates instructors will say that they can tell the difference by how somebody walks, if they do Pilates or not, where like if your hips are forward, or, you know, if you have a big arch underneath your back, because again, it encourages that proper posture and alignment. So, you know, it's like having your tailbone tucked, having your shoulders rolled back, your ribs are knit together because your abs are engaged, right? Because your core is supporting you in everything that you do, which is going to prevent the injuries and all of that. So yeah, so that's a little bit, I know I just went on like a huge tangent
No,
about it. I could talk about Pilates forever, but I hope that that like helps people who maybe aren't familiar or like think about it like yoga too.
absolutely. I wrote down 3 words as you were talking. What comes to mind when I think of Pilates, just from your description, restorative, like
Hmm.
hormonal, nervous system, all of it.
Totally.
And, again, given the fact that I just had hip surgery and I'm almost 50, like ladies out there who are perimenopausal, menopausal, who've been beating your body all these years with cardio and hit and all the things like I had, one of the best things that you can do is lower intensity workouts like Pilates, right? Like,
Hmm.
and you get that. Number 2, the other word, strengthening, you get
Yep.
that strengthening component. And number 3, effective. It's
Yep.
effective for full body conditioning. So like, and like you said, there's 2 different, I think also a lot of people think, oh, it's that funny looking machine, the reformer. And that's not the case. You can grab a mat, get your app,
Hmm.
do a workout, right?
Yep.
Like there you
Exactly.
go. You can
Yeah.
don't even have to pay for a gym membership, nothing. You could just do it in the comforts of your own home on your schedule. That's your
Yeah.
time, right?
Yeah.
Um, and the only other thing I was thinking is when you said about yoga, I am currently still studying Kundalini yoga, which
Mm,
I feel is a lot like more about alignment, spinal health, and the
mm,
breath and the
yeah.
breath. So I feel like I don't know all areas of yoga, but I do find that it's got some similar qualities to
Yeah.
Pilates as far as bringing your
Totally.
attention to the breath, the movement, mindfulness
Hmm.
component, and not necessarily as much opening up as like more spinal
Of the,
alignment
yeah.
and the chakra movement of the energy
Totally.
through the chakra
Totally.
system. So
Yeah.
any um
Yeah.
so you're also big into mindset, which I am as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's such a it's a hard word. Like everyone's like, what do you mean by mindset? Right. But just can you give us at least like just say 3 mindset shifts that might help a woman listening to this interview, might help make a difference when it comes to either her health, her happiness, or just her overall experience in this life?
Yeah, totally. So I think that number one around food, which we kind of already touched on, I think is a really important mindset shift that's been the pillar of everything that I've done, which is that abundance mindset with food, of focusing on what can I add to my plate to feel both good, full, satisfied, both physically and emotionally, versus thinking about like an elimination mindset and that lack mindset. Because the thing is that I'm really big on these mindset shifts because I think that especially I've noticed that I think once you begin to shift that, especially if it's been around food, more often than not, it's not necessarily about the food, but it's funny because the mindset that we have, if we are like when I was stuck in diet culture, when I was stuck in that lack mentality around food, that elimination mindset, that lack mentality doesn't just stay with your food. It goes into all areas of your life and it bleeds over into other areas of your life because you're just in that limiting belief sort of state with food that it's going to bleed over into other areas. So I think that's number one. That was like one of the most important things in terms of that. And then another mindset shift that I'm really, really obsessed with too is the idea of thinking about movement versus thinking about exercise or workout. And I don't think there's anything wrong with the words exercise or workout. But for me personally, and I think that a lot of people are probably in this place and maybe don't even realize it. But for me personally, like workout and exercise had so many shoulds attached to it from like society and from the outside world that when I shift my verbiage to movement, it allowed me to move my body intuitively. And like I was saying, in those different phases of my cycle of being really accepting of where my body was. And just, I had that consistency that I was saying, okay, I'm going to move my body each day. And that allowed me to have it look different. And it allowed me to remove those shoulds of it should be a certain length, it should look a certain way, it should be a certain level of hard or whatever. And rather, it allowed me to tune into like what movement is going to feel good in my body today. Maybe that's a walk, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's Pilates, maybe it's a run, whatever that is for you. Maybe it's jumping on the trampoline with your kid, right? Like, and it allowed me to kind of remove the exercise and workout had to look a certain way. It had to be in a gym or whatever. So that's another huge mindset shift that was so, so important and healing for me and my journey, because it also allowed me to stay super consistent with movement too, which I think that is something that has been huge. And then a third mindset shift is focusing on the internal validation versus the external validation, and asking yourself, how can I give what I need to myself today? And something that has helped me do that a lot is use my gratitude journal, because that's something where I write down every morning or sometimes afternoon. Like I said, I haven't done it yet today, of what I'm going to need for the day, what's going to fill me up. And that's why I really like this journal specifically, because number one, it gives you that focus on gratitude, and it allows you to, again, start with that abundance mentality of what's going right versus focusing on what's going wrong. Because so often I think we're programmed to what is going wrong. And I mean, we're human, right? Like that's just what we look at in general, but it allows me to focus on what's going right. And then from there, looking at, okay, what's going to make me feel really good today? What mood would make the day great? And focusing on, okay, how can I fill up my cup? How am I going to feel if I accomplish these things by the rest of the day? What's going to make me feel good? Sometimes that might be calling a friend. Sometimes that might be FaceTiming family. Sometimes that might be getting to bed early. Sometimes it might be reading a book, going on a walk, moving my body, getting something done for work. Whatever those things are, focusing on filling up my own cup, which is that internal validation, which again, going off of the journal too, another piece of that journal is then you give yourself an affirmation each day, which for me, I tell myself whatever I'm feeling I'm lacking, right? So if I'm not feeling super confident in my career or something like that, I'll say like, I'm the best health coach and I'm making a huge difference on so many women's lives, right? Because here's the thing, it's like, I think it's so easy to listen to people on like these podcasts and think like, oh my gosh, like they're doing so much, or whatever. And it's so funny because we're our own hardest critics. Like everybody deals with that self-doubt. Everybody deals with, imposter syndrome in some way, shape, or form. So that's something that I need. Or sometimes if I'm focused on too much of external validation, I'll say, I'm confident, I'm capable, I'm successful, and I can give myself everything I need internally. Like that's my current affirmation that I've written for like a week, because I'm like, I just need to focus inward. So that's another huge mindset shift of just focusing on how can you give yourself what you need versus looking externally for those things. So I'd say those are like the three most important ones in terms of like my whole philosophy around health and wellness.
I love that. And, it hit on different aspects, and so I think that was super important. And on a gratitude note, like, I know a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know what to say. Like you woke up, you
Yeah.
woke up today, like, or
Yeah.
you're happy that you're going to have a smoothie for breakfast, or you got a good night's sleep, or you're going to read a book, like a page of a book today. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be just, what are you grateful for? Don't overthink it. Just,
Totally. And
and it,
sometimes like mine are like the same sort of thing, but in a different way, right? It's like
so
one day, maybe it's like, I'm so grateful for my solid foundation that like my husband and I have, or maybe one day I'm like, I'm grateful for, his support, or, you know what I mean? Like different things like that. Like he usually makes my list, but it's in a different way. And it's like, how can I kind of look at like different things that I appreciate about him,
Mhm.
or like sometimes it's usually about like my health or something about that. So I think that just focusing on the small things, because I think that so often it's like with the gratitude piece, we focus on like, oh, it needs to be this like big grandiose thing. But I think like you said, of like waking up, or maybe you got a really great night's sleep, or maybe you're really grateful for an opportunity that you're getting that day, like things like that. And I think it really does, it makes the biggest difference in how you go about your day. And it also allows things that are important to come to really illuminate themselves, and things that are less important, to really just kind of go away. It almost, it puts the, gravity of things in alignment as well.
I totally agree. And, actually, it's great to start your day with that, and also maybe even end your day, like lay in bed and
Mm-hmm.
think of 3 things that went well, like, because so many of us lay in bed at night and go, oh, what we didn't get done on our list of 10 things, right? And we all know we don't put 10 things on your list in a day.
Yeah.
Put 3 maybe at most,
I
right?
know.
But like what you didn't get done or what went wrong. And like um that's not the mindset we want when we're going to shut our eyes for the next 8 hours and integrate and process memories and all the things. Like we really want, even if it's a little win from the day, or a good, like one little feeling you had during the day, it was a good feeling or whatever.
Yeah.
Try to think of
Yep.
3 of those and then shut your eyes and go to sleep.
Yeah. And sometimes I've even done, I don't do it every night, but when I'm feeling like really overwhelmed and like I'm not doing enough, or like it's a really busy phase of my life, like one of those sort of times, I will usually write down like a done list, because I think so often we write down a to-do list and then we look at the to-do list and we're like, oh my gosh, I only got like 3 things done off my to-do list. But then if you go back and you look at like all the things you did that day and you write them all down, you're like, oh, wow, I actually did do enough today. It's almost like that validation of writing down that done list that's really helpful for me. If anybody is dealing with that or like is going to bed thinking about that, like write down all the things that you're proud of that you accomplished that day and focus on that. And then if you need to, if it's going to help you sleep, like write down your top 3 priorities for the next day, right? That like maybe didn't get done. But I think that we are so hard on ourselves. We're our toughest critics, as I was saying before. And I think that so often we don't even realize how much we're getting done in a day too.
Totally agree. 150%. One last question. What is, and I end every podcast interview with the same question. And I actually was going to get rid of it, but some of my listeners were like, I always want to know what the experts wish they knew 5 or 10 years ago. So what is something that you know now that you wish you knew 5, 10, or even I had people go back 25, 30 years, depending on their age and when they entered their expertise. But like, what is that one thing? I know you probably have more than one, but just
Yeah.
what comes to mind right now that would, maybe shed some light on how my audience thinks, and they might give them the aha moment that they've been waiting for this entire interview.
Yeah, I would say I'll give kind of like a 2-part one. The first is that you're worthy of showing up for, you're worthy of taking care of. I think that like in and of itself is a reminder that I think everybody needs, because I think so often we don't think that we're worth it, or maybe we just don't think we're worth taking the time for. So that's a one piece part of the puzzle. And then another thing as well is that it's going back to that like external validation of you really need to focus on giving yourself what you need. And when you're thinking about opinions, like the most important opinion is the one that you have of yourself. And knowing that it's like other people's opinions about you or thoughts about you are nobody's business but theirs, and have absolutely nothing to do with you. So if it comes to, and I said this in the beginning of the interview too, if it comes to disappointing somebody else or disappointing yourself, choose somebody else, because if you're not showing up for you, nobody else is going to. And also how you're taking care of yourself bleeds into every single relationship in your life. I noticed that once I started taking care of myself, once I started prioritizing myself, once I started putting myself and my own self-care on a pedestal, you teach others how to take care of you. Every single relationship in my life got better when I started to focus on that and started to prioritize that. And I think it's a really important thing to show everybody in your life, because you want them to do the same for them, everybody that you love too. So yeah, those would be my things.
I love it. Lead by example, right? Be that role model.
Yeah.
So we're done with I'm done with picking your brain and all the things,
Yeah.
but I'm sure by the end here, my audience is like, oh my gosh, where is she? How can I connect with her? So how can my audience connect with you? How do you work with clients? Like, give us all the details.
Yeah, so everything can be found at my website, which is PurelyPope.com, PurelyPope.com. And there you can find my on-demand platform, which is called PurelyYou. It's your home for becoming the best, happiest version of you. And it's on-demand body-loving Pilates and motivational health coaching. So there's new health coaching sessions put up each month too, and quarterly challenges. And it's only $9.99 a month. So it's very, very affordable as well. And you can do Pilates with me. So that's like the number one place to go, is the subscription. And then also on my website, you can click health coaching if you want to work with me one-on-one. I still do take one-on-one clients, and you can set up a free consultation. And then on social media, I'm Purely Pope on everything: Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I'm sure there's going to be like a new platform by the time this comes out. And then also my podcast, the Purely Podcast, which is available everywhere podcasts are found.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here today. It was so great to connect again.
Yeah.
And thank you for letting us pick your brain on, making ourselves a priority and mindset and Pilates and all the things. I'm sure we went so many places today, but it was
Yeah.
all good. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to
Yeah.
come and hang with me for a little
Thank
bit.
you.
And hopefully we get to connect again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was incredible and such a great interview and a great chat. So thanks for having me and letting me
Thank
share.
you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Real Heal and that you learned something new. And before you go, can you do me a quick favor? Take a screenshot right now and share it to Instagram and tag me so I can celebrate you for taking action and improving your health. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please take a minute to leave me a rating and a quick review. This will help others just like you find the show. And do not forget to subscribe because you will not want to miss out on any of the amazing guest experts that I have coming up very soon. And remember, it's not selfish to take care of yourself. Do one thing today that makes you happy and learn to love life again. And with that, I'm out of here. Talk to you again soon.